Hello, thank you everybody for joining. Today is January 18th, and this is the January MCC meeting. We've got a few topics to discuss, and I will go ahead and pass it over to Jeremy.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm going to pass it straight over to Michael Verling, who is with the foundation, that manages a lot of the way we use the LoRa network and radio parameters. And we have been talking about the need to update some of the hardware requirements, possibly on all hotspots going forward, so that they can use some better features and we can use the network more efficiently. So I'll hand it over to him to talk about that feature and whether we should adopt it.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, so I'll be pretty brief. Jeremy just mentioned this to me yesterday, but so we could maybe in the future have a more in-depth talk about it. But in general, so if you look at regulations worldwide, countries that have duty cycles in general, like if you use listen before talk, that sort of mitigates your obligation to adhere to the duty cycle limitations. So duty cycle limitations, like they restrict how long you can be on the air. And that's going to impact, Helium, as we do more beacon witnesses. And if we do any kind of Class C work where we're doing, say firmware upgrades over the air, all those things like use airtime, and we're going to be hit with duty cycle limitations. So listen before talk mitigates that. And basically what it is, you listen on the airwaves before you transmit. So given that European regulations include this, and then European regulations are cloned for Africa, so all of Africa, Europe, yeah, I would recommend that going forward we have the added hardware to support listen before talk on all hotspots.
Yeah, and
any
to
questions?
Make it more clear is that this is not something that we can simply code into the firmware or ask Nova to do. It's a feature that has to be on the concentrator card, so what's being proposed here is that we update the HIP-19 requirements, the audit requirements, to say that if you're going to field a new gateway and have a roadmap for this, that you need to have this hardware feature on your concentrator. So, we have minimum standards for the concentrator saying it has to be a SX1302 equivalent now, and things like that. What Michael's asking us to do is consider updating the minimum requirements for gateways and hotspots going forward to have this feature called listen before talk, or LBT as it's often phrased in the documentation.
And this is for all regions, not only Japan and Korea.
Yeah, because European regulations, all European countries this applies to, and European regulations are cloned into Africa, so that means all of Africa. And then it's quite possible that other countries would follow Europe's lead, and that there'd be similar regulations worldwide. So to be future-proof, it would be best just to do this everywhere. And probably is a useful feature for other things. So I know the LoRa Alliance is looking into, various features that involve like listening to the airwaves. So having that hardware would enable those kind of things too.
Is there any downside other than an increased kind of cost for new manufacturers to this? Is there any reason that we wouldn't want to do it?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. I mean, I'm not sure if I feel like the spot for that piece of hardware is in almost all of their layouts. I can't speak for sure, but like that chip that's supposed to be there is Jeremy and Michael or anyone here who knows if the Coruscant design has a spot for that. I think is it 1262 chip?
You're on the right track as to what people have on their particular boards. I think I'm not actually that knowledgeable for that one question.
So because it hasn't really come up that many times. And in fact, if I could, actually like ask some of the makers, but it has come up maybe once or twice that a maker wanted to sell into Japan and they had to send us a photo, like sort of after audit, that they had indeed populated their concentrator. And I think in both of those cases, if I recall correctly, that all they did was populate their existing concentrator. They didn't spin a new concentrator for those regions. Which would
That
indicate,
sounds great for them.
right. It would also indicate that the cost is just an IC and some passives. It's not a whole new spin.
But that's definitely my question too, is if anybody, and maybe some of our manufacturer representatives here, can give us a clue what the added cost of that is, if you have any input. I'm assuming no, so.
Crickets. Yeah, no, zero input. Let's do whatever we want.
Michael, how would you feel about us, spending the month researching this and coming back with a vote on our next meeting?
Researching the hardware cost.
Not so much the cost, more like the.
Is that your question?
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, let's do that.
And we, if we do adopt it, we also have to consider how it's going to take effect. I mean, clearly anybody fielding a new design would be subject to it, but how would we ask manufacturers shipping existing designs, hey, here's the deadline date where you've got to start shipping LBT in your existing gateways. So that's some of the logistics we're going to have to go through.
But overall, I think, if it future-proofs our hardware, I like this idea very much.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we've got things to bounce there. At least everyone's aware of it now, and anybody who needs to watch the recording can get more of a sense of what it is when we start talking about it.
And can also give us input if they know.
Yeah. Great. Maybe we should move on to the next items.
All right.
Anything else,
Everyone.
Michael, about that?
That's
Before I
it.
leave?
I'll drop off. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. All right.
See ya.
Bye.
I guess it's on me to read this agenda. So, Sophie, you talked about having a maker exit strategy document that we should all be reading and contributing to. Do you have an update about it?
No, I don't have an update except for what we are discussing about some manufacturers have approached us with the idea that they might take over fleets from manufacturers who are no longer present. So I'll put a link.
Cool.
Maybe I won't put a link yet because that document is not ready for the public to read.
Sure. Next on the agenda, just a general announcement to everyone, including me, who has been lazy about it, to update your bio. Put a little bio for yourself on the MCC member stuff. There's a link in this agenda meeting notes here. You'll see it. Click on that. I need to do it, so believe me, it's not. If you haven't done it, you're in the same boat as I am, which doesn't make you great, but makes you like me. Very good.
Thank God some of us have done it. Those of us who love to talk about ourselves.
Alrighty. So, looks like light hotspot HIP 19 application review. We've got, I believe, and I'll ask Christina this, 7 proposals to review.
Yes, that's correct. There are 7.
So get on that as soon as possible, please, in the channel. Any particular things we should be looking out for, Christina, as we dive into this? Again, it's been quite a while since we've had a lot to review.
No, all the links that are in there for the HIP 19, the radio certifications that they provided us, as well as the audit documentation, Only other thing to note is that manufacturers will not be allowed to be like officially approved unless they have like their maker app. But I believe all of the manufacturers that are part of this first batch of light hotspots are manufacturers who already have maker apps. And if not, I'll make a note in that channel.
Great. And this next one is a mystery to me, so I'm going to ask whoever put it on there to talk about it. And that is maker support on Open Balena. Does that ring a bell with anybody?
Yes, there are some Nebra or there are some makers on Balena who are
Mhm.
really sure how to describe it. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
I actually have to find the thread where I was writing about it. This is from a little while ago. Okay, let's move on.
Okay, as long as it won't be too distracting, yeah. I think this is another one, though, Sophie, that you brought up. So, just a longer term discussion about hotspots in China. Some background here. The MCC, part of our mission, we require makers to always consult with their local radio authority and demonstrate that they've communicated and gotten a certification from them. In China, that body, I believe, is called the SCCS. Yeah, what is it?
SRRC.
Thank you. The SRRC. And we've gotten from multiple sources notification the SRRC is asking Helium not to participate in China, meaning like don't allow anyone to sell gateways there. They don't want Helium, generally the network in China right now. That's separate from another Chinese policy from the larger body, basically banning cryptocurrencies. That one was a little less clear, but this one is a lot more clear. The SRRC is not going to approve any Helium designs for the time being. So that being said, that's the fact of the matter. What do you think we should have a discussion on, in particular, Sophie?
I don't know that it falls under the MCC, but I wanted us to be aware that there are quite a few hotspots in China, if we go by the Explorer, that are indeed witnessing and mining HNT.
Yeah, that certainly has been the case for quite a while.
Yes. Yeah, I realize it's not something new, but I just threw it on our agenda as something to know about.
Yeah. In so much as it affects the MCC, again, our mandate is really about manufacturers. So I guess knowing that, knowing there's going to be struggles if manufacturers says they're going to sell in China, we should let them know, well, we do require that you get an SRRC certificate. You're probably not going to get it, beware. That could be our policy. About anything on chain, it's already on chain, very hard for us to do anything that's kind of outside of our mandate, just reminding everyone else that. So we can't like unilaterally decide, oh, well, we should just shut off all hotspots in China. That's outside of the HIP-19 mandate.
Right.
But, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, Jeremy, that the MCC has required SRRC certification for China for quite a while. I think maybe as long as August 2021.
Yeah, I agree. It has been a while. I just remember it hadn't always been the case. We didn't quite know who to contact there. We did resolve it around that.
And I have in my notes that in January of 2022, from the MCC notes, the public MCC notes, that the SRRC stated that they would not support or would not approve any Helium hotspots in China. So I think this is just one for manufacturers. Probably would be best if you don't ask us to approve you to sell into China.
Yeah, I think
And
open for discussion. The way to phrase it, I think, is just I don't want us to to have to like enforce other countries' laws and get ahead of them. I think
Right.
the best way for us to approach is just say, be warned, you do need an SRRC certificate. That's our requirement for you to be approved. And following the logic, you're probably not going to get one, but good luck. If they can get one, then there's been some change in China, or they've found some ruling, whatever it is. I feel we should allow it if they can get an SRRC certificate. Right? It's not like what I feel would be bad is for us to unilaterally say we're not going to accept any more CN 470 proposals. We're just going to warn them. We don't think it's going to be possible. You have at it, but do know our requirement is that you have an SRRC certificate.
That sounds good.
Any objections to that, generally? Anybody?
No, sounds
Everyone's
good
been
to me.
silent. Yeah, I know you're nodding, but I'm trying to get some other input from our other members here. Kevin, does that make sense?
Yeah,
I see nodding, so.
it's total sense. And yeah, it was just more anybody I've talked to, his question is that, yeah, there's hotspots in China. So yeah, but that makes total sense on how to approach it.
Cool. Oh, right. This next one. So a maker, we're not going to name that maker, but that maker, has communicated several times. It's Christina. I've been CC'd on it. And they've communicated, and notified them that they seem to be lagging on some of the requirements for the new maker app, which is going to be a requirement to primarily so that those hotspots and their owners can manage them once we're on the new chain. It's a big requirement to have that maker app. This maker said they're not going to make that app. They do not want to do it. They don't feel that they have the funds to do it. And they've communicated that it's fine if we remove their staking ability. And so essentially they've sent communication, at least via email, to resign their maker key. So I think we should vote on that maybe separately in the channel and talk about it. But that is the situation. And if we do that, we'll make an announcement, and of course, the maker will be named. And for the public, we'll make an announcement basically showing what the maker asked us to do, how they communicated, and make it hopefully very plain for everyone to see that it was something they had asked and intended to do. It's not a great situation, but it's kind of in line of the maker exit strategy.
Totally. I think this is they don't want to participate anymore. Like, it's not on us to force them to participate. We just stop them from onboarding new hotspots, which is what they've asked us to do. It's like the Gallagher thing about high school kids that get suspended. Like, you don't want to come, we won't let you.
Yeah,
I think it's pretty reasonable.
and I wonder how much more we're going to start seeing this now that that the same question came up. They didn't want to add any more onboarding credits, and other makers are at 0, and that keeps dwindling down, or they just have a couple, and we're going to keep chasing them around, and then they're going to have that conversation again where they're not going to make the app. That's the next mandatory thing. And there's also discussion in lots of the makers discords that their apps aren't working, or they don't have an app. It hasn't been working for a year. So I'm seeing lots of that. So how we approach that going forward too.
Yeah, to be clear, the lack of onboard credits is what started the conversation with this particular maker, but it's not particularly the reason at the moment why we'd be removing them. It's because they committed that they really will not be doing things going forward. In other cases where we've reminded makers that they're near 0, they have topped them up. And I know some makers seem to operate on a procedure where they get very close to 0, or they're at 0 and they have an automated procedure that seems to top it up. Discussions with them, none of them seem to be particularly keen to pre-commit all of the DC data credits that they need, that they know is outstanding. They enjoy. They seem to want to burn just in time and not keep a lot of credits in their account, which, I guess that is, we have to decide that's probably acceptable. Can't force them to. So again, this one has come to 0 a lot, but in communicating with them, that's when they express these further things that they would not be able to commit to these designs. Hey, Brad, welcome.
Hey guys, sorry I'm late.
No worries. You'll just have to read the notes and listen to the recording.
Jeremy, the only thing is
like
making sure they do it in time, right? And within whatever, I forget if we'd set a time like, hey, you have to have enough for the next week or whatever it is.
I
But
think
yeah,
we set a
it's-
limit that like, if we see it at 0 for 2 weeks,
Yeah.
we send you a notice.
Something like
Christina might
that.
have more details.
Yeah, I think we said something like that on the last one or 2 meetings ago, yeah.
But definitely not something where we need to tell them like when they have to top it up or how much they like, we don't want to run their business. That's their business.
Yeah. So when it comes to that, Brad, a quick, maybe we did talk about listen before talk. It would have been great to have you there. Michael Verling actually popped in and made the case that we should perhaps adopt an amendment to HIP 19, the hardware requirements requiring every hotspot to have listen before talk hardware on the concentrator going forward, and then a roadmap to how we get existing manufacturers and existing designs to meet that requirement. One big question we had is the approximate cost that it takes to do that. And you actually would probably know this very keenly. What is the radio chip? Is it the
1261. So it's probably a, I don't know, a $5 at the most BOM cost difference between the two core cell cards. So if you add margin to that, it may make a $10 difference to the selling price. To the end customers. As it propagates. I think the bigger concern is, I would say 90% or more of the units in the field today do not include the 1261, and they use the version of the core cell that didn't populate the listen before talk circuit. So I think the retrofitting of all, if you just the backward compatibility with the installed devices, everything that's waiting to be sold today needs to be considered, because the manufacturers obviously you can't easily go change that. It's not easily field upgradable, right?
Right. Yeah, I don't think it's a great way of communicating that. I don't think that we were suggesting that everything had to be retrofitted. That'd be a nightmare. Wouldn't even be possible in some cases. I mean, that would just be an enormous thing. But having a roadmap, a flag date in which there's no more being made the old style, and new designs required.
But just because of supply chain, consider like some manufacturers probably have inventory they've already committed to of the old card that they still haven't used, and they may have 6 months of inventory in the channel. So if you're going to put a date out there, if you want to migrate to this, I just think you need to get a date out there sooner, and probably give people a lot of runway to switch to it. And you're not going to disable the old style. You're just going to you won't be able to get the new benefits until you convert, right? So.
Right. And perhaps, I mean, I want to float this idea out here, and this is a lot of work, but it might be the right way to do it, is to make this an incentive to hotspot owners that they want this new design and we're willing to pay more for it. And the way to do that is a HIP that would perhaps give slightly more rewards in POC or something like that to hotspots that have LBT. So that way you kind of, we're letting the market decide how to get that and encouraging people to adopt it. And that's a way that the old design and the new design could coexist in some way. We've talked about doing that for the secure concentrator, which is also not on the discussion notes, and I'm wondering if it should have been. Sophie.
Yes, it should be.
All right, so cool. Well, we'll table back that listen before talk and talk in the channel as we committed to. Thanks for letting me back up into that bullet point, everyone, because I'm glad we had Brad here to get a quick sense of the cost. All right, so back to the maker that's intended to resign. We talked about that. We'll update you on that, Brad, in channel if you've been watching. We don't want to name since we're on the recording, don't want to quite name the maker by name yet, but if we do vote, we will, of course, name them. All right, let's talk about the secure concentrator.
Yeah.
Why don't I hand it off to you, Sophie?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't add it to the thing.
No worries.
I wrote my notes this morning. I had a call with Enlighten Paul this morning. Sorry, let me.
Yeah, Enlighten Systems, the name of the company that Paul has formed around his design and his general consultancy, I would call it.
Yeah, that's what, okay. So there is a HIP 72, and it's not ready for voting yet. We would like for it to go to vote, but there are some pieces that, in my opinion, need to be added to the HIP. So right now it doesn't say anything operationally about how we are protecting the key and what the method is. I don't know if that goes in the HIP, but I thought we should discuss it regardless. And I also think everybody in the MCC should read that HIP and make suggestions so that it can go to vote. It's been floating around for, it's been around for a while. It's ready. So, does anyone have any comments about that?
Yeah, so like, what are the open questions before us that we really need to consider? I mean, I know one of them is, if everyone remembers the basic concept behind this design, it's going to be a new drop-in sort of replacement. It requires a different software, a little bit on the gateways. The big questions are, who's going to manage the firmware for it? And will we have just a single manufacturer and the MCC is in charge of that? Or do we open it up to a design and have multiple makers for this design? And the MCC will just be in charge of compliance with that. What are those requirements? They, of course, need to be a bit stiffer than existing HIP 19. And a bigger thing is if it's a centralized firmware that for security that needs to be signed by a central key, should the MCC be in charge of that? We need foundation resources probably to manage it. We would direct the foundation to sign it. And that does add a lot of complications for us to audit the firmware. I find someone, there's a lot of questions.
Yep. So, yeah, so right now it's going to be manufactured by, can we say, we think?
Maybe not. Maybe just say that there's one proposed big player who's offered to do the initial design.
Or the initial manufacturing, because the design is, if not public, it will be made public. It is open source. And the manufacturer that has offered to partner is someone who has a lot of experience as a manufacturer. So I think, you nailed it, Jeremy, when you said, do we limit it to this one manufacturer? I think that we would limit it at least for the first X amount of time, but then open it up.
Yeah, I mean, that there's certainly a case for that model. That describes the original Helium hotspots. If you think about it, Helium made the first ones, Nova Labs now, right? And then after a while, after proving that it worked, they did reach out to CalChip Rack, reached out to Rack, and CalChip resold a design, the very first second manufacturer. And then the MCC, MOC was formed after that to help us decide for all the other makers. So that is a working way to do it. Start off with one design and then learn all the things that we learned that need to be ironed out and published and made into details that anyone else can go off and do that design.
Yep.
Yeah, and then what role the MCC will play, again, like you said, with the firmware updates, it's open source. And I think Paul mentioned it, very seldom it would need to be updated, the software of it. But also too, so if you mentioned something about the hardware audit, all these would have to hardware audit with this SCC chip in it, right?
No.
No?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so, well, I mean, I'm not the only person who would make this decision, but the way that I would see it after I spoke with Paul this morning, he has designed we'll call it a programming station to put the key into the secure concentrator. It also verifies that the key has been programmed, and I think it checks the security key itself. We'd have to check on exact functionality. It also connects to the internet to save the key in a public database, which would then probably become the foundation's database. So all of that would happen at the manufacturer level. So the audit would not happen, with all the hotspots. It would happen once, in the same way that we audit hotspots that have an alternative security implementation. I think that's probably the way. Yeah, we talk about that. We have the ECC. There's one method that we go for that, and then we have one-offs that are for trust zone or any other kind of security implementation.
And so that's great. I think there's a lot of things that the MCC can kind of decide internally, but there's one big issue I think that's really key to all of this, and that is the HIP. Essentially, none of this is going to work if it's an added extra cost with no benefit.
Right.
And so the way to get that to be a benefit is to adjust the chain logic to give extra rewards to these those hotspots running verified secure concentrators. And of course, that's HIP material. That's not something the MCC can unilaterally do, but I think it's very important. And that reward scale, whatever you call it, that incentive is super key to all of this, no matter what the firmware or whatever the logistics are behind how it works. It's not going to work on the market or work in any way, get deployed unless people can see the real H&T behind it, or IoT actually will probably by the time it gets fielded. So that's the big thing really to think about is MCC getting behind. If we do really want to support this, we need to all work on that HIP and tout it and answer questions in there as much as we possibly can.
And to remind everybody, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 1.25 times is what the proposal is in the HIP. And my feeling, I mean, I think it's very possible that there's already some people who don't like this idea in the HIP 72 channel, but I think I would urge us all to really work on this in the coming days so that this can go to vote and we can address the community issues, from the community, rather than trying to figure out what they might be by ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. I guess a better way of me to phrase that is we need to really engage with the community on this one and learn what's acceptable and how it's going to work.
Yeah, that was a good way of putting it. So do you think everyone here, do we all think that we could agree to take a look at this by a week from this coming Friday?
Yeah, that seems like too long, but yes.
Yeah,
Wanna
I
go
agree. I agree.
A week from today, we could do that. What do you think?
I mean, by Friday, can we just look at it? It gives people 3 days to read. What is it? Not that many words.
Sounds good. I mean, let's see. Brad, what do you think?
Sure. I have to get caught up, but sounds reasonable.
I like that idea because it's like closet space. The more time you give people, the more it's just going to take. And it'll all happen the last few days anyway. So
If you wait till the last minute, it only takes a minute.
All right. So let's kind of pull all the voting members here. Can everyone vote that they are going to look at it and comment if they have a comment by Friday?
Yes.
yes, I'll raise my thumbs up there.
You betcha. And also, anybody wants to put notes on what the MCC role will play in the SCC chip and the process.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do have some thoughts about that, which I wrote in my notes, but I'll say them here. I do like that Enlighten has designed a programming station, which he described to me as like a computer in a box that has internet access, and then it's like a bed of nails with a thing that comes down and probes the board. I like the idea that we as the MCC would audit that programming station and that design, and that in fact that exact station would be manufactured and sold only by Enlighten to other manufacturers to program.
So then what you're saying is once it's approved, then it's okay for the other manufacturers to use it as that station you're calling it, to program up and create other SCC chips.
That's right. And that programming station, Enlighten has agreed that it could be open source. However, my personal opinion is that that we would want to say the only manufacturer and seller of that specific station would be Enlighten. I mean, let's consider there's only going to be about 3 or 4 manufacturers. It's not like Enlighten's going to sell 100 of these. It's going to be just a few. But that would be one way to control it.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I want to give some wisdom of what I've heard about how the manufacturing a lot of times works, and you'll be shocked to hear that many manufacturing floors do not have internet access. It's very bizarre, but I've heard it time and time again. So that's one possible roadblock to this idea. Very often when these sort of, this is called personalization in the industry, or setup or serialization, maybe not serialization. It's something that manufacturers have to do, like to put in serial numbers and things when the part's manufactured. This is a little bit more complicated than that, but it's very similar in design. And those systems are bed of nails. They do program the part as it's coming out of the oven, so to speak. But very often they're done as batches. Like they'll load in a batch of serial numbers or load a batch of MAC addresses. That's another big thing that gets programmed this way, into one of these computers running MS-DOS 4.2. I mean, these are often old, crazy designs, and they are not at all hip to connected internet stuff. So the design is probably going to have to be able to work in sort of batch mode, where the computer does program in these things, gets the public key out, stores it in a local database, and then someone takes a USB fob out of that machine and then pops it into a desktop to actually upload to the internet. So I do want to caution that. And also just a counter vote against this design is perhaps we could leave it up to manufacturer to figure out how to do the programming, but they will have to at least attest that they will only put in the firmware, the public key that they control or that we control, whatever it is. They have to attest that they will burn that key into the unit. They have to attest that when they do ask it to generate its own key and get the public key out, that it is legitimately the key that came out of that hotspot. Much like the existing design right now for the component we call Gateway MFR. If any of you have ever had to participate in audit or are ever deep in the Helium hotspot firmware, that's the existing piece of code that Nova wrote that all manufacturers use, at least for the ECC 608, to do this same job. So it's worth considering. It might be great to have that as part of design. It might be really kind of insane to put that level of requirements and say you have to use this particular machine.
Yeah, Jeremy, I'm just going to agree with you on the that you cannot assume that manufacturing lines have internet access. The majority don't. They won't deal with it. So, and again, I don't know that that's the MCC's. I would say I don't know that that's the MCC's mandate to go figure that problem out, but do be aware of it. That's a wrong assumption to assume that they could put something connected on the manufacturing line. And also there could be like 5 people in the supply chain. So I think this is just another question: is where do they get personalized at in the supply chain? And it could be a different company than that's the OEM, that's the manufacturer, right?
Yeah, it certainly could be done in many different ways, but ultimately that step has to make its way onto the chain. That public key that it comes out of the concentrator needs to be inserted into what is effectively the onboarding server at some point. So it's something that has to be done, but I agree, dictating when it has to be done is hard, and maybe a bit outside of our scope, or how it has to be done. But open to discussion. And how are we doing at time? We're technically done in 5 minutes?
Yeah. Ober and Tony, do you think you'll be able to take a look at the secure concentrator HIP as well by Friday?
Yeah, okay.
Great.
I will.
Cool. All right. 5 minutes. Anybody have any dad jokes in the vein?
No, that wraps
Jamie?
everything on schedule. Let's cut it early, man.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, we have lots of stuff to do. Definitely stay in channel. Just a reminder, we've got to vote on those light hotspot designs. We have to talk about the secure concentrator. We have all committed to looking at that by Friday. And
I would say also the same for the light hotspots. I think there's 7 now. There's going to be 8 in about an hour. So
cool.
Also, any of the new members who need any assistance with, what to look for, just ping me. I saw your comment, Nick, about making a video. I don't have time right now, but that's a good idea.
Roger that. Well, if you want to do it with me, we can go through one together whenever you have time. I will facilitate that.
Yeah, thank you. Bye,
All
y'all.
right.
Thanks,
you,
everyone. Have a
everyone.
great day.
Thanks, guys. Ciao, ciao.
All right.